In this video, I'm going to be comparing the PlayStation 5 to the PlayStation 4 to help you decide whether or not it's worth upgrading from either a PlayStation 4 to a PlayStation 5 or just picking up either of these consoles in 2024. So in this video, I'm going to be comparing the performance and graphics between these two consoles, as well as more importantly, the games that are available for both these PlayStations. We're also going to be comparing the DualSense controller to the DualShock 4 controller. So before we get on with this video, if you are a long-term viewer of this channel, you'll notice I am in a different location. I have recently moved house, so I'm in the process of sort of building a YouTube setup. So I've just quickly created a temporary YouTube backdrop in my living room. So hopefully over the next few videos I will be designing and creating a nice YouTube space where I will be filming a lot of my future videos, so that is to come. So that also explains why I've been slightly less active on YouTube over the last few weeks, but hopefully that'll all change. Anyway, let's get on with the comparison of these two consoles. So we're going to start this video off by comparing the design of these two consoles. As you've probably noticed, I have got the slim variant of both these PlayStations. So this is the PlayStation 5 Slim that released a couple of months ago. And over on this side, we've got the PlayStation 4 Slim. So these are essentially the best looking variants of both these consoles. So it is completely subjective which console design you prefer. But in my opinion, I actually prefer the PlayStation 4 Slim design. I think it's a more rugged looking industrial design. And I do appreciate how thin this console is. As you can see, it's not a very thick console. The outside of the PS4 Slim is covered in a textured plastic, which means that it doesn't scratch that easily, which is very nice. This is unlike the upper surface of the new PlayStation 5 Slim, which is a shiny plastic. I don't know how easy it is to see, but the upper panel of the PlayStation 5 Slim is actually shiny white plastic, which is a material that I absolutely hate. It picks up loads of fingerprints and can scratch really easily. So I am more of a fan of the textured material on the PlayStation 4 Slim. So having a closer look at the PlayStation 5 design. So as you can see, I've got the digital only edition, so it doesn't have the disc drive. So I do understand a lot of people are going to prefer the design of this console, but as I've explained in a previous video, I do think this is quite an awkward design. As you can see, I've had to go out and pick up a stand separately because this device is very unstable standing up. You could also say the same about the PlayStation 4, but I do think that this console isn't designed to be stood up like this. I do think you are supposed to lie this console flat, whereas with the PlayStation 5 it does give you the option to stand the console up. But I would, as I've said, advise buying a stand. In terms of I/O, it is a victory for the PlayStation 5. This console does come with a larger selection of ports. Both these consoles have Ethernet ports. Both these consoles have HDMI ports, but the HDMI port on the PlayStation 5 is a HDMI 2.1, which supports higher resolutions and higher frame rates, whereas the original PlayStation 4 only supports HDMI 1.4. But I do believe the PlayStation 4 Slim and PlayStation 4 Pro support up to HDMI 2.0 because these slightly newer variants of the PlayStation 4 do support features such as HDR and 4K video output. But the reason the PlayStation 5 wins when it comes to I/O is that the PlayStation 5 has way more USB ports. On the front of this PlayStation 5 Slim, there are two USB-C ports. On the original PlayStation 5, one of these USB-C ports doesn't exist. It's just a regular USB-A port. Sony decided to change this to two USB-C ports with the PlayStation 5 Slim, which I think was a good choice. The PlayStation 5 also has two USB ports on the back, so that gives us a total of four USB ports. When compared to the PlayStation 4, the PlayStation 4 actually doesn't have any USB ports on the back, but it does have two USB ports on the front. So this only has two USB ports, so I mean, more USB ports the better, so the PlayStation 5 does win on this. So before we move on, I am interested to hear which design you prefer. Is it the PlayStation 4 or the PlayStation 5? Let me know in the comment section below. And as always, if you are enjoying this video so far, be sure to check out my channel and maybe drop us a cheeky subscribe. And we are on the road to almost hitting 5,000 subscribers, which is absolutely amazing. Anyways, that was my cheeky self-promotion. Let's get on with the video. So we're next going to talk about the performance and graphics between these two consoles. So the PlayStation 4 was originally released back in 2013, and 7 years later in 2020, the PlayStation 5 was released, so there are 7 years between these consoles. And believe it or not, the PlayStation 5 on paper is actually quite a lot more powerful than the PlayStation 4. Teraflops is one metric of calculating the compute power of a device. And if we compare the teraflops between these two consoles, the PlayStation 4 has a teraflops figure of 1.8, whereas the PlayStation 5 produces over 10 teraflops worth of performance. So there is quite a large difference in performance between these two devices. But obviously numbers aren't everything. The question is, how do both these devices perform in the real world when playing games? So I hooked my PlayStation 4 up to my TV, and immediately I noticed that the main menu felt slightly choppier than my PlayStation 5 menu. I then booted into a game and realised that the loading times on the PlayStation 4 are significantly longer than the loading times on the PlayStation 5, and that's because the PlayStation 4 uses an old-fashioned hard drive, whereas the PlayStation 5 has a super fast SSD. So essentially that means the read and write speeds of the PS4 hard drive are a lot slower, meaning that the loading times of games on the PlayStation 4 were significantly longer. I also noticed when playing the PlayStation 4 on my 4K TV that the image quality was slightly more pixelated, and that's because the PlayStation 4 can only play games up to a max resolution of 1080p, whereas the PS5 can play games up to 4K. And I also noticed when playing the same game on both consoles that not only was the resolution lower on the PlayStation 4, but the frame rate was also lower. An example of this is with the 2018 God of War, which runs on both devices. On the PlayStation 5, you can run the game at a dynamic 4K at 60 frames per second, which looks amazing. Whereas on the PlayStation 4, the game still does look very good, but it's at 1080p and 30 frames per second. So as you can see, there is a significant advantage when it comes to resolution and frame rate when it comes to the PlayStation 5, just because the hardware is that much more powerful. So at the end of the day, when it comes to performance, it's pretty obvious, but the PlayStation 5 is the more powerful console, does produce better graphics, better frame rate, better resolution, when compared to the PlayStation 4, but that isn't something we didn't already know. We knew that the PlayStation 5, the newer console, would perform better. But the real question is all this extra performance with the PlayStation 5 enough to convince someone to upgrade from a PlayStation 4, or convince someone to buy a PlayStation 5 over a PlayStation 4? And in my opinion, I think it depends on the individual. If you're someone that cares about graphics, frame rate, resolution, then yes, definitely go with the PlayStation 5. But if you're someone that just wants to enjoy the game and you're not that fussed about resolution, graphics, frame rate, then the PlayStation 4 is still a great option. But at the end of the day, you are still able to play a lot of modern games on the PlayStation 4. And this console generation, it's been the case that a lot of games have been released on both PlayStation 5 and PlayStation 4. So really, by going with a PlayStation 4, if you're not fussed about graphics and performance, you won't be missing out on a lot when it comes to games. For example, the 2022 God of War Ragnarok was released on both the PS4 and the PS5. And the latest Call of Duty is actually available on both consoles. So in terms of modern games in 2024, a lot of them are still being released on the PlayStation 4. So we're next going to compare the controllers between both the PlayStation 5 and the PlayStation 4. So the PlayStation 4 was released with the DualShock 4 controller, which we have here, whereas the PlayStation 5 came with the DualSense controller. The button layout between both these controllers is almost identical, except for the addition of a mute button on the DualSense controller, which isn't present on the DualShock controller, and that's because the DualSense controller comes with an inbuilt microphone. Both controllers do come with speakers though, but that is a feature that I did end up disabling straight away because I don't like it. In terms of comfort, I do think both controllers do feel fairly comfortable in the hand. Both controllers have touch pads at the top, which some games utilize, but the DualSense controller is the newer of the two controllers, so it does have some notable upgrades over the DualShock 4 controller. The first upgrade that I did notice was the fact that the DualSense controller uses USB-C. It's also worth noting that the DualSense controller does have longer battery life than the DualShock controller. So online it says that the DualSense controller has between 6 and 12 hours of battery life, whereas the DualShock 4 only has 4 to 8 hours of battery life. So longer battery life is always better, so that is a win to the DualSense controller. Another difference that I have noticed is that the haptic motors in the DualSense controller are significantly better than the haptic motors in the DualShock 4 controller. And finally, the DualSense controller comes with adaptive triggers, which initially I did think was a gimmick, but after using them, especially in shooting games such as Call of Duty, I do actually quite like them, so that is an advantage to the DualSense controller. But I am quite curious to find out which controller you prefer, so let me know in the comment section below. So finally, we're going to talk about some features that are available on the PlayStation 5 that just aren't available on the PlayStation 4. The first feature is the new PlayStation VR 2, which is the new VR headset that's available for the PlayStation 5. So I know you can get the first generation PlayStation VR headset for the PlayStation 4, so that is a really good deal. I know you can pick that up secondhand for not a lot of money, but if you're after a more immersive VR headset experience, then the PlayStation VR 2 is probably the way to go. And that is only available on the PlayStation 5. Another accessory that's only available for the PlayStation 5 is the new PlayStation Portable. This is essentially a controller and screen that allows you to play your PlayStation 5 remotely from anywhere if you've got a Wi-Fi connection. And if that's something that interests you, then it's only available on the PlayStation 5. So anyway, that's going to wrap this video up. If you have enjoyed, be sure to hit that subscribe button. We're on the road to 5,000 subscribers, which is absolutely amazing. And if you have got any questions about anything mentioned in this video, leave them in the comment section below. And I will see everyone in my next video.